My daughter looked straight at me and pretended she didn't know me, not dramatically, not cruelly, just long enough for everyone else to notice I was the mistake in the room. I felt it before my mind caught up. The way her eyes slid past me, the way her body angled away, the way the air around her tightened like something fragile was being protected from contamination. The room stayed calm. Music played. People laughed. And yet, something irreversible had already happened, because when your own child decides you are a liability, the rejection doesn't need words to finish you. I stood there holding my purse with both hands, shoulders squared, breathing slow, waiting for her to correct the moment. She didn't. My name is Janice West. And that was the night my daughter decided I no longer fit the story she was telling the world about herself. The invitation had been brief. Come, Mom. It's important. Important made me hopeful. Important made me believe I still had a place. I dressed carefully, not flashy, not apologetic. The kind of clothes women wear when they've learned survival means looking respectable even when life has been rough. I arrived early. I always arrive early. Poor women learn not to take up extra time. Leslie moved through that space like she belonged to it completely. Her posture was practiced. Her smile was controlled. She didn't rush. She didn't look uncertain. She looked like someone who had been chosen. Standing beside her was Joe, her husband, quiet, watchful, rooted. He didn't speak much, but when he did, people leaned in. Authority sat on him comfortably, like an old coat. When Leslie finally acknowledged me, it was with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom," she said, kissing my cheek lightly, already stepping back. No introduction followed. "No, this is my mother." The omission landed harder than an insult. She guided me toward a seat near the wall. Not hidden, just placed. "Sit here for a second," she whispered. "I'll be right back." I nodded because mothers are trained to cooperate when their children are uncomfortable. I didn't know yet that comfort had nothing to do with it. Minutes passed. Conversations flowed. Plates arrived. People brushed by me with polite glances that never lingered. Leslie laughed with strangers. Joe spoke with confidence. I watched my daughter perform a version of herself that did not include me, and slowly, quietly, it began to hurt in a way I hadn't prepared for. Joe approached at some point, his smile neat, professional. "Mrs. West," he said, "big night for Leslie." His eyes flicked over me, once, measuring, assessing. "She's under pressure." It wasn't concern. It was instruction. I told him I understood. I always understood, right before I was dismissed. When Leslie came back, she didn't sit. She stayed standing, body angled toward the room, like she might be needed at any moment. "Mom," she said softly, "I need you to be cool tonight." The word felt like a warning. I said I was fine. Her jaw tightened. "I mean it," she whispered. "This is my life now." She gestured vaguely toward the room. The money, the calm, the people who didn't look like they carried history in their bones. Joe stepped closer behind her, not touching her, just present enough to signal support. That's when she said it, her voice gentle but decisive. "I can't keep explaining you to people like this." The sentence didn't echo. It didn't explode. It ended things quietly. "If you're watching this right now, tell me what time it is where you are, because I want to know how far this moment traveled and still found someone listening." I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I told her, calmly, I didn't come for them. I came for you. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her purse and slid a small envelope across the table toward me. Cash, neatly folded, controlled, final. "For your ride home," she said. I pushed it back. "Keep it." Joe didn't react. He already knew where this was going. Leslie's lips pressed together. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she murmured. Then she turned away. She walked back into that room without looking over her shoulder. Joe's hand rested at her back, guiding her forward. And just like that, my daughter disappeared into a life that no longer had room for where she came from. I stayed seated, breathing steady, understanding something terrible and important at the same time. This wasn't temporary. She was cutting me off. I didn't leave that restaurant angry. Anger would have made it easier, because anger has somewhere to go. What I carried out into the night was heavier than anger. It was the sudden understanding that my daughter had been practicing how to live without me long before she finally did it in front of witnesses. The cold air outside hit my face, and I stood still for a moment, not because I didn't know where I was going, but because I didn't know where I belonged in her story anymore. I walked to my car with my head high like my mother taught me, but my insides felt like they'd been folded and put away. Leslie hadn't cut me off in one sentence. That sentence was just the cleanest one she'd ever used. The truth was she'd been editing me for years. At first, it came wrapped in concern. When she started doing well, when her voice changed on the phone, when her words got tighter like she was trimming off anything that sounded like where she came from, she began to correct me in ways that looked small but landed deep. I remember the first time she asked me to stop saying certain words. Not because they were wrong, but because they sounded like me. She laughed when she said it, light and quick. And I laughed back because I didn't want to be sensitive. "Mom, don't say it like that." She'd tell me, palm gently touching my forearm like we were sharing a joke. "Just say it like this." I would repeat the new phrase for her like a student, and she'd nod with relief like she'd fixed something. Then she would look around, even when we were alone, as if someone important might be listening and judging the sound of my mouth. When she started inviting me to certain places, she would give me instructions before I even got dressed. Not advice, instructions. Where something simple, she'd say, "Nothing too loud." She'd tell me the kind of shoes, the kind of purse, the kind of hair. She'd ask for pictures before I left the house, and if I sent one, her replies would come fast. Maybe a different scarf. Try a smaller bag. "Mom, please." The please always had an edge, like I was making her life difficult by being myself. Once, I showed up to an event she said was casual, and she met me at the door with her smile already strained. She didn't hug me first. She adjusted me first, tugged at my sleeve, smoothed my collar, and whispered, "Just don't talk too much tonight." It wasn't that she thought I would embarrass myself. It was that she thought I would embarrass her. She didn't mind my struggles when we were home, when it was just us and the truth. She minded them when other people could see what she came from. The sharpest part was how she hid me in plain sight. She'd call me a family friend instead of her mother. She'd say my first name quick and keep moving, like attaching me to her would slow her down. If a woman complimented her, Leslie would beam and accept it like it belonged to her alone. If someone asked where she learned her discipline or her work ethic, she never said, "My mama." She'd say, "I've always been ambitious," and I'd stand there smiling like my throat wasn't tightening. Sometimes she would speak over me mid-sentence, not loud, just quick, redirecting the conversation as if my words were a loose thread that might unravel her. The more she succeeded, the more she treated my survival like a stain. I started to realize poor didn't mean no money to her. Poor meant anything that reminded her she wasn't born into comfort. Poor meant waiting rooms, old shoes, packed lunches, patched up coats, the way I'd count change and pretend I wasn't counting. Poor meant the version of herself she used to be when she needed me, and she had decided that version was something to outgrow, not honor. That night after the dinner, my phone stayed quiet. No apology. No follow-up message pretending it went wrong by accident. I sat at my kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a cup of warm water because my nerves wouldn't settle, staring at the screen until my eyes began to burn. When I finally called her, it rang once, then cut off like someone had pressed a button with no hesitation. I called again, slower, like carefulness could change the outcome. This time it didn't ring at all. My message wouldn't deliver. I opened our thread and saw the small, cruel proof sitting there without emotion. The contact photo was gone, the status line blank, and the call button useless. She hadn't just walked away from me. She had blocked me, clean and final, like shutting a door and throwing the key away. After Leslie blocked me, people around me started offering solutions the way folks offer tissues at a funeral, quick, well-meaning, and useless. Give her time, they said. She'll come around. But time doesn't soften something that was sharpened on purpose. What I did instead was go back to the one place in my life that never begged for permission to exist, that land my father left behind, the one thing everybody treated like a burden until it became the reason certain people couldn't sleep right. My daddy didn't leave me cash. He didn't leave me a neat little savings account or a stack of bonds in a safe. He left me dirt and paperwork and a promise made in a voice that still sits in my bones. I can still see him on that last good day he had, sitting on the porch with his boots off, toes in the grass like the earth was keeping him steady. "Janice," he said, slow, looking straight at me, "don't let anybody talk you out of what's yours just because you're tired." I didn't understand then how tired a person could get, not the kind of tired sleep fixes, the kind of tired that makes you consider trading your future for a quiet week. When he passed, the land came with its own kind of grief. It wasn't pretty land, not the kind you see in pictures with white fences and horses. It was rough, tucked away outside town, more trees than clearing, the kind of place folks only mentioned when they wanted to joke about snakes and mosquitoes. The first letter that came after the funeral wasn't sympathy. It was a notice. Taxes due. Then another. Fees. Then another. Maintenance requirements. The land didn't bring me one dime, but it demanded money like it had a mouth. People started circling the way they do when they smell someone alone. "Sell it," my cousin told me, sitting at my table like he lived there. "What you holding on to it for? You can't eat dirt." A neighbor said, "That land don't do nothing but cost you. Take the money and move on." Even at church, a woman I trusted leaned close after service and whispered, "You know your daddy meant well, but you don't have to suffer to honor him." That's what they called it, suffering. Like keeping what your father left you was a sin. I tried to make it make sense on paper. I looked at the numbers with my reading glasses sliding down my nose, pen tapping the table, my stomach tight. I was working part-time jobs that didn't care if your back hurt. I'd come home smelling like bleach or fryer oil, hands rough, feet swollen, and still the mail would be waiting like a threat. There were nights I sat on the edge of my bed with that folder in my lap, thinking about Leslie's school fees, thinking about groceries, thinking about how easy life could be if I just signed my name and let the land go. But every time I pictured it, I saw my daddy's face, not angry, disappointed, not at me for needing help, but at me for letting go of the only thing he could still protect me with. That's what made it hard. It wasn't greed. It wasn't hope of getting rich. It was loyalty, plain and stubborn, the same way some women stay married too long because they promised in front of God, the same way a mother keeps showing up for a child who won't even answer the phone. I drove out there, sometimes when my head got too full, parked on the shoulder where the gravel ended, and stood at the edge of the trees listening. The land was quiet in a way that didn't feel empty. It felt like it was watching me back. The wind moved through the branches like a low conversation, and I would talk to my daddy under my breath, not asking for money, asking for strength. "I'm trying," I'd tell him, feeling foolish and desperate at the same time. "I'm holding it like you said. Then Leslie's success started taking up space in the world, and folks began speaking my daughter's name with respect, while they still spoke mine like a cautionary tale. I felt the shame of that, too, but I never connected it to the land. Not then. To me, the land was just the last thing in my life that didn't laugh at my struggle. I stayed late at work, skipped little comforts, sold what I could, and paid what I had to pay because I refused to be the woman who lost her father's gift out of exhaustion. The day the lawyer approached me, it wasn't dramatic. It was almost gentle. I was leaving a small office downtown, clutching a folder of receipts and notices, when a man in a clean suit stepped into my path like he'd been waiting. He smiled like we already knew each other, held out a business card between two neat fingers, and said, "Mrs. West, I believe you own a parcel of land outside town. I'm authorized to make you an offer." He said it like he was offering me relief, like he could see my tiredness in the way I carried my folder and decided to be kind. The suit was dark, pressed sharp, not flashy, but expensive enough to signal authority, and his smile had that practiced warmth people use when they want you to lower your guard without realizing you've done it. I looked at the business card, then at his face, and the first thing that hit me wasn't gratitude. It was irritation, not because he approached me. Folks had been telling me to sell for years. It was the way he said he was authorized, like my land was already halfway out of my hands. I didn't ask for an offer. I told him. My voice stayed calm, but my grip tightened on the folder like I might need it as armor. He nodded like he respected that. "Of course," he said. "I understand. But it would be irresponsible not to at least put it in front of you." He gestured toward the sidewalk, as if we were just two adults doing business. And I realized he had picked a spot with foot traffic, a place where I couldn't easily raise my voice even if I wanted to. Polite people use public places as shields. "What company?" I asked. He gave a name that meant nothing to me, one of those names built to sound neutral, like it could belong to anyone. "We're looking to acquire multiple parcels in that area," he said, smooth and measured like he'd practiced the sentence in the mirror. "Your parcel is one of the more complicated ones to reach. So we're starting early." Starting early. The words landed strange. The land wasn't in a hot area. It wasn't near shiny neighborhoods or new stores. It was quiet, burdensome, the kind of land people ignored unless they were hunting. "How do you know I own it?" I asked. He didn't blink. "Public record," he said, casual, like my private life was a file anyone could pull while eating lunch. My stomach tightened, but I kept my face still. "What's the offer?" He opened a thin folder he already had in his hand, meaning he hadn't come to ask me if I was interested. He had come hoping I was desperate. He slid a paper toward me, and the number printed on it made my eyebrows rise before I could stop them. It wasn't pennies, but it wasn't respect either. It was the kind of money that looks tempting when you're tired and broke, the kind of money that could catch a woman who's behind on bills and convince her she's been saved. But it wasn't enough to explain the urgency in his posture. He watched my face carefully, the way people watch a lock to see if it's loosening. "This is fair market value," he said. Fair. Market. Value. 3 words that get used like the truth even when they're not. I handed the paper back. "No," I said simply. His smile stayed. "Mrs. West," he said, softening his voice like he was talking to a stubborn auntie, "I'm not trying to pressure you. I'm trying to help you make a good decision." "A good decision for who?" I asked. That made his smile flicker, just for a breath. Then it came back smoother. "For you," he answered. "That land comes with taxes, maintenance, liability. Selling would give you immediate relief." He said relief like it was a gift he was offering personally, like he cared about my burden. But his eyes didn't look caring. They looked focused, hungry in a quiet way. I shifted my weight, the folder under my arm now my body instinctively moving as if to create distance. My father left that to me. I said, I'm not selling. The lawyer nodded again, like he'd expected the answer, like this was stage one of a plan. I understand sentiment, he said, but sentiment doesn't pay property tax. His tone held a hint of impatience now, thin as a thread, almost invisible if you weren't listening for it. You're not the first person to hold on to land out of emotion. He paused, then added, and you won't be the last. Something about that line didn't sit right. It sounded less like advice and more like a warning dressed up as conversation. I tucked the folder tighter under my arm and took a step to the side, preparing to leave. He stepped with me, not blocking my path, but keeping pace like we were still in agreement. Would you consider a different number? He asked. No, I repeated. Not today. Not ever. His gaze dropped to my hands, my worn nails, the skin rough from work, and I could see him calculating how long I could keep saying no before life forced my hand. That's when he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice like he was about to share something personal. Do you have children? He asked. The question landed so wrong it made my chest tighten. It wasn't relevant to the sale. It wasn't business. It was personal. And the way he asked it, quiet, careful, almost curious, made it feel like he was looking for a door that wasn't the land. I stared at him, my mouth dry. Why does that matter? I asked. He held his palms up gently, as if I was overreacting. It doesn't, he said quickly. It's just, sometimes these things become easier when heirs are involved. Family decisions. Future planning. He smiled again, but now I could see the shape of the lie. He wasn't asking because he cared about my future. He was asking because he wanted to know who else could be used to reach what he couldn't get from me. I didn't answer him. I just stepped back and looked at him the way my father used to look at men who tried to take advantage of folks with soft voices. The lawyer's smile held, but his eyes sharpened. Keep my card, he said, tucking it into the edge of my folder without my permission. You may feel differently when the pressure gets heavier. I turned away without responding, walking toward my car with my heart beating too fast because I could feel it now. This wasn't about money, and whatever they wanted, they were willing to study my life to get it. When Leslie married Joe, it didn't happen in the kind of way that reaches back to include everybody. It happened like a promotion, fast, polished, and designed to make sure the past stayed outside the frame. I only knew because I heard it through other people first, the way bad news travels when you're no longer invited to the front door. A woman from church mentioned it in passing, like she was trying not to hurt me, but couldn't resist the story. Leslie got married, she said, eyes flicking to my face to watch what it did. I nodded like I already knew, like my heart hadn't just dropped into my stomach. Later, I saw a single picture online, Leslie in white, smiling the same controlled smile. Joe beside her looking calm, his hand placed on her waist like a claim. The comments under it were full of congratulations and blessings, and not one person wrote my name, not even to ask if her mother had been there. That's how I understood what kind of family she had married into. A family that could erase someone without raising a hand. Joe's people didn't look dangerous. That was the trap. They looked safe. They looked like the kind of folks your daughter could run to when she wanted to feel protected from struggle. They had clean haircuts, quiet money, and manners that worked like locks, smooth on the outside, secure on the inside. When people spoke about them, they always used words like respectable and well-connected, and those words have fooled enough women to last generations. In the early months, Leslie's life started to change in ways even strangers could see. The things she used to do, little traditions, small joys, fell away. She stopped coming around the neighborhood. She stopped visiting places she grew up in. She stopped answering old friends the way she used to. Folks said she was busy, said she was building, said marriage changes a woman. But I knew the difference between change and correction. Leslie wasn't just changing. She was being shaped. Even from a distance, I could see how it worked. Joe didn't isolate her by forbidding her. That would have been too obvious. He isolated her by offering her a cleaner world to live in, one where certain people didn't belong, and he let her tell herself it was her choice. There were little signs that reached me, quiet and sharp like needles. A mutual family friend told me Leslie had started introducing herself differently, leaving off pieces of her story like they were stains. Another told me Joe's family threw a welcoming dinner, and Leslie showed up in a dress she would have once called too much, laughing softly and nodding at everything the older women said like she was trying to pass an exam. I didn't need to be in the room to know what happened. Polished families don't always insult you directly. They praise you into obedience. They tell you how lucky you are, how blessed you are, how good this man is for you. They make sure you start apologizing for where you came from without anybody asking you to. At some point, Leslie did reach out again, not to reconcile, not to soften what she'd done, just to make sure I stayed where she left me. It was a short message, clean and careful, no warmth. I hope you're doing okay. It said, no, I miss you. No, I'm sorry. Just a sentence that sounded like charity. I stared at it for a long time before I replied, because every part of me wanted to ask why my child could celebrate a marriage without her mother and still sleep at night. But I didn't ask. I answered the way a woman answers when she refuses to beg. I'm fine, I typed back. Take care of yourself. She didn't respond. The silence after that message told me something else. Joe wasn't the only one holding the boundaries. Leslie was helping. She wanted the distance. She liked the way the distance made her feel upgraded. And that hurt more than anything Joe could have done, because I knew my daughter's hands were on the door that kept me out. Months turned into years with that same quiet cruelty. Leslie's world kept growing, and mine stayed small on purpose. She didn't send pictures. She didn't call on holidays. When people asked me about her, I learned to smile like my mouth wasn't tired. She's doing well, I'd say, and keep moving. I prayed for her without telling anyone. I was praying for myself too, because it takes a kind of strength to love someone who is embarrassed by you. Then, one afternoon, I ran into someone who'd been close enough to Leslie to hear the details, someone who didn't like gossip, but couldn't shake what they'd overheard. They leaned in and lowered their voice like they were handing me something dangerous. Joe's family talks about business all the time. They said, and the last time I was around them, I heard one of them ask Leslie about property. My skin went cold, not because I understood everything, but because the word property carries weight in the mouths of people who think they own the world. What kind of property? I asked, my voice steady even as my pulse jumped. The person hesitated, then said it anyway, slow, like it didn't feel right coming out. They asked her about your daddy's land. When I heard Joe's family had asked about my daddy's land, I didn't run to the land. I ran to the paper trail, because land doesn't get hunted with feelings. It gets hunted with files. The next morning I drove downtown and sat in a plain office where the air smelled like toner and old carpet, waiting my turn while people around me whispered about divorces and deeds like they were talking about weather. I told myself I was only there to make sure nothing had changed. That's what I told myself, so my hands would stop shaking. But the truth was, something had already shifted inside me the moment I heard them say land, because I recognized that kind of interest. It wasn't curiosity. It was need. The woman behind the counter didn't know my story, and I didn't give it to her. I just gave her my name and asked for the public information tied to that parcel. She tapped at her computer, slid a printout across the counter, and said, "Everything looks the same." The words should have calmed me. They didn't. Need doesn't always show up as change. Sometimes it shows up as attention. And Once a certain kind of family fixes its attention on something, it starts moving around it like water finding cracks. I drove back home and sat in my kitchen, staring at that printout while my tea cooled, listening to my own breathing like it belonged to someone else. The land was still mine, on paper, but I couldn't shake the feeling. That paper was the weakest part of ownership when the people coming for you knew more about systems than you did. That afternoon, the same person who'd warned me called again. Their voice was lower this time, strained, like saying the wrong thing could bring trouble to their doorstep. I wasn't supposed to tell you, they said, but it didn't sit right on my spirit. I didn't ask them to explain their spirit. I asked them what they heard. They told me Joe's family had been talking about something they kept calling a project. Not a business, not an investment, a project. Said the way people say a thing when they believe it's already happening. They said it wasn't public yet, but it was serious enough that the older men in that family were meeting more often, serious enough that folks were being careful with their phones. The person said they heard one of them mention timelines and approvals, and then another voice, sharp and impatient, said they couldn't move forward unless they secured that section. That section. They didn't say my land. They didn't have to, because the next sentence was the one that made my mouth go dry. They said they tried to buy it. The person whispered, but your daddy's girl wouldn't budge. My daddy's girl. That's what they called me. Not my name. Not a person. A problem. I pressed my fingers to my forehead, the way I do when I'm trying to stop a headache from turning into a storm. Why would they be talking about it with Leslie? I asked. The person paused. Because they think she can get it. They said simply. That's when the shape of it came into focus. They didn't need me to agree. They needed me to be bypassed. I could picture it without ever seeing it. Joe's family sitting around a table full of clean plates, talking in soft voices about strategy, about legacy, about what families do for each other. And Leslie nodding like she was learning a lesson. I could see how they'd make it sound good. They wouldn't say, we want your mother's land. They'd say, we want to build something for the family. They wouldn't say, your mother is in the way. They'd say, your mother doesn't understand what this could be. They would wrap the hunger in responsibility and hand it to my daughter like a gift. And Leslie, my Leslie who had already proven she could erase me when she wanted, would hear what she wanted to hear. This is the kind of family you chose. This is what being grown looks like. This is how wealth moves. The person on the phone told me one more detail, and it chilled me because of how small it sounded. They keep saying she's the clean way. They said bringing it through her would keep it out of court. Out of court. That meant they were already thinking about resistance, already calculating my refusal as an obstacle they needed to step around without leaving fingerprints. That night, I sat alone in my living room with the lamp on low, looking at the walls like they might answer me. I thought about the lawyer who had approached me with that too neat offer, the way he asked about children, like he was searching for leverage. I thought about Leslie's face at that dinner, the controlled sweetness. The envelope slid across the table like I was a problem to be managed. I had believed she cut me off because she was ashamed. Now I understood something sharper. Shame made her willing, but strategy made her useful. A few weeks later, I got the last piece from the same person, spoken like a confession. They've been having meetings at their house. They said, and I heard them say it's time to get her organized. My throat tightened. Organized how? I asked. The answer came slow, careful, like it tasted wrong. They said they're going to do some family restructuring. I didn't see the papers the day Leslie signed them. That's what made it so clean. The kind of families that move like Joe's family doesn't do their damage, where outsiders can witness it. They do it indoors, over food, with voices kept low and smiles kept steady. So later, when the victim tries to explain, it sounds like paranoia instead of memory. What I heard came to me in pieces, like rain tapping a window, soft, constant, impossible to ignore. The same person who'd warned me before called again. And this time their breath sounded tight, like they were speaking from a hallway with a door half closed. They had her at the table. They said, "Papers everywhere." I sat down slowly, my knees suddenly weak. "What kind of papers?" I asked. "A lot," they whispered. They kept saying it was normal. "Marriage stuff. Protection stuff." Protection. That word does a lot of work in the wrong hands. It sounds safe. It sounds loving. It sounds like somebody is taking care of you. But I knew how Joe's family used language. They didn't say control. They said stability. They didn't say ownership. They said legacy. They didn't say trap. They said plan. The person told me Joe's mother, unnamed, but described so clearly I could see her, kept sliding pages toward Leslie with calm hands, speaking in that gentle tone older women use when they're correcting a younger woman in public without making it look like correction. "Sweetheart," she kept saying, "this is just how responsible families handle things." Joe sat beside Leslie with his hand on her shoulder, not squeezing, not comforting, anchoring, like he didn't want her to drift too far from the agreement. And Leslie, hungry for belonging, nodded the way a woman nods when she wants to be chosen. According to the person on the phone, there was a man there too, quiet and neat, flipping pages, pointing where to sign, never raising his voice. He didn't introduce himself as anything dramatic. He didn't need to. His job was to make the room feel official enough that Leslie wouldn't ask too many questions. They told her it was routine. They told her it was for her benefit. They told her it would keep outsiders from meddling. Outsiders meant me, even if they didn't say my name. They said it protects her from bad influences. The person whispered. I closed my eyes at that, my throat burning. Leslie had always thought my struggle was contagious, like poverty was a sickness you could catch through association. Joe's family didn't even have to convince her hard. They just had to frame control as safety and make me the danger. The papers weren't one thing. That's how they got her. They didn't drop one heavy document in front of her and say, "Sign your life away." They layered it. A page about marital responsibilities, a page about emergencies, a page about handling business if one spouse was traveling, a page about temporary access in case of illness. They kept using words that sounded harmless. Temporary, standard, family, protection. They talked about children, too, even though Leslie didn't have any yet. They talked about future, about stability, about how a good mother thinks ahead. They wrapped it in motherhood before she even became one, because that's the easiest hook in the world, making a woman feel irresponsible if she doesn't comply. They told her it was smart. The person said. They told her it was love. I listened, quiet, feeling the old helplessness rising, the kind I used to feel when Leslie was a teenager. And I could see her stepping toward a bad choice, but couldn't grab her without her pulling away. I wanted to drive over there, knock on their door, stand in their kitchen and say, "Don't sign anything you don't understand." But I wasn't welcome. I had been erased. My warnings would have sounded like jealousy. Their reassurance sounded like wisdom. The person paused, then added something that made my skin go cold. Joe didn't let her take the papers home. They said, he kept them right there. Why? I asked, already knowing. The person's voice dropped. He said he didn't want her overthinking. Overthinking. That word has ruined more women than any enemy ever could. It makes you feel ashamed for having instincts. It makes you swallow your own doubt to avoid being called difficult. And Leslie had spent years trying not to be difficult in rooms like that. After the signing, everything looked fine from the outside. That was part of the trick. Leslie still posted pictures, still smiled, still wore her new life like armor. If you didn't know what to listen for, you would have thought she was thriving. Then the first crack came, small enough to dismiss, sharp enough to remember. The person called me on a Sunday night, voice trembling. Janice, they said, forgetting their caution because fear had taken over. She tried to move money today. Just a little. She couldn't. I gripped the edge of my table. Couldn't how? I asked. There was a pause. Then the words fell out like they hurt to say. She told Joe she couldn't get into one of her accounts anymore. The person whispered. And Joe looked at her like he expected it. When Leslie told Joe she couldn't get into one of her accounts, he didn't panic. He didn't rush to fix it. He didn't even look surprised. According to the person who kept risking themselves to warn me, Joe's face barely moved, just a slow blink, a small tightening in his jaw, like a man watching a plan land exactly where it was supposed to. Leslie laughed at first, the nervous little laugh women do when they're trying to turn danger into a misunderstanding. It's probably the app, she said, still smiling, still trying to be easy. Joe didn't smile back. It's not the app, he told her calmly. Calm is what makes it frightening, because calm means it's already decided. Leslie asked what he meant, and he didn't answer right away. He walked to a drawer, pulled out a folder like he'd been waiting for this moment, and set it on the counter. Everything is being reorganized, he said, like he was explaining a household chore. Reorganized. Not stolen. Not taken. Reorganized. Leslie started flipping through the papers, brow furrowing, lips parting, and that's when the warmth in that house began to drain. Not all at once. In stages. Like a faucet turning slowly off. She called Joe's mother first, because older women in polished families train younger women to believe they're safe with them. She explained carefully, voice respectful, trying not to sound accusatory. Joe's mother listened, then sighed like Leslie was exhausting her. Sweetheart, she said, you're doing too much. Leslie tried again, voice tighter now. I can't access my own account. Joe's mother's tone stayed soft, but something inside it sharpened. It's not your own when you're married, she said. Your family now. That word, family, was the chain. Leslie asked to see the documents again, asked for clarity, asked who made the decision. And that's when Joe's father stepped in, voice low, authoritative, like he was settling a childish argument. This is what responsible families do, he said. You were getting too independent. Too independent. Like independence was a flaw. Leslie's stomach dropped, because in that moment she understood this wasn't about protecting her. It was about owning her. She turned to Joe, her husband, her choice, the man she had defended when the small discomforts first showed up, and she looked for partnership. Joe gave her management. Calm down, he told her. You're making it bigger than it is. He said it the way men say it, when they want you to doubt your own brain. Leslie tried to stand her ground. She said she wanted to speak to someone outside the family. Joe's mother laughed lightly, like Leslie had said something naive. Outside, she repeated. Why would you drag outsiders into family matters? Leslie said, because this is my life. Joe's mother smiled. Exactly, she replied. That's why we're handling it. A few weeks passed where everything was tense, but still dressed up. Leslie was still allowed to live in the house, still allowed to show up for dinners, still allowed to smile in pictures. But the temperature had changed. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Decisions were made without her. She began noticing small things, cards not working at certain stores, notifications sent to Joe's email instead of hers, mail disappearing before she could read it. She asked questions and got that same soft punishment. You're overthinking. You're stressed. You don't trust us? Trust became the weapon. If she pushed, she was ungrateful. If she stayed quiet, they tightened the rope. Then the children came. Not used like they were loved, used like they were leverage. When Leslie got pregnant the first time, Joe's family acted thrilled. They threw a baby shower that looked like a magazine spread. They told her she was glowing. They told her she was blessed. And while they said all that, they tightened their grip. A mother needs stability. Joe's mother would say, rubbing Leslie's belly like she owned the future inside it. A mother shouldn't be emotional. Joe's father started mentioning custody in casual ways, like jokes that weren't jokes. You know, he'd say with a chuckle, "In this family we protect our blood." Leslie would laugh weakly because she didn't want to imagine what he meant, but her eyes would go distant, and the person who told me all this said that was when Leslie started losing her shine. After the second child, Leslie began to look tired in the pictures she posted. Not new mom, tired. Controlled tired. The kind of tired you get when you're being monitored. Then the final slide happened, and it happened under the name of concern. Joe told her she needed a break. He told her she was overwhelmed. He told her it would be best if she stayed with family for a while so she could rest. When Leslie said she didn't want to leave her home, Joe's mother stepped in with that same gentle voice. "Sweetheart," she said, "nobody is pushing you out. This is temporary." Temporary. The word that always comes right before permanent. Leslie packed a small bag because she didn't want to look hysterical. She brought the children's favorite blankets because she didn't want to scare them. She told herself it was a pause, not an eviction. The person who witnessed it said Leslie stood in the doorway holding the diaper bag, like she was waiting for someone to stop her, waiting for Joe to say, "Come back upstairs. This is ridiculous." Joe didn't stop her. He kissed the children, not her. He told her, "Get yourself together." Leslie left, still believing she would return when she proved she could be calm enough to deserve her own house. 2 days later, she came back with the kids and her little bag, ready to walk back into the life she thought was hers. She put her key into the front door and turned it once, twice, 3 times. The lock didn't move. She tried again, harder, panic starting to rise. She looked down at the key like it had betrayed her. Then she pressed the doorbell and waited. No answer. She called Joe. It rang and rang until it stopped. And when she finally looked up, she saw it, fresh metal on the door, clean and new, the kind of lock you install when you don't want someone back inside. Leslie didn't call me. When she stood outside that door staring at a new lock like it was a stranger wearing her husband's face. That's what pride does. It makes a woman suffer quietly just to avoid giving someone the satisfaction of knowing she's bleeding. I learned later that she sat in her car with the children in the back seat, the engine running because the night air was cold, and she kept staring at her phone like it might blink and fix itself. She called Joe again, then his mother, then his father. No one answered. When she finally got through to a number in Joe's family, the voice on the other end wasn't panicked or apologetic. It was calm and tired, like the person had been waiting for her to accept reality. "You shouldn't be there," Joe's mother said. "You're upsetting the children." Leslie swallowed hard and asked, "What is this?" Joe's mother sighed, softly. "It's what you needed," she replied. "Space. Time." Leslie's voice cracked in a way she tried to hide. "I live there," she said. "My kids live there." "Not right now," Joe's mother answered, and that sentence was the whole truth dressed up as temporary. Leslie drove away because she didn't want the children to see her break. She found a small extended stay place on the edge of town, the kind of building that smelled like old cooking oil and carpet cleaner, the kind of place people use when they don't want anyone they know to see them. She checked in with her chin lifted, speaking politely, acting like she belonged there, even while the clerk's eyes slid over her clothes, and then to her kids like he was already forming an opinion. The room was too quiet. No soft bedding, no family photos, no familiar corners, just beige walls, a thin bedspread, and a TV bolted to the dresser like it didn't trust you. Leslie sat on the edge of the bed with her phone in her hand, thumb hovering over my contact the way a child hovers over a hot stove. She hadn't unblocked me yet. That was the first barrier. The second barrier was her own shame, because calling me wouldn't just mean she needed help. It would mean she had been wrong. She had spent years making me feel like poverty was contagious, years treating me like a stain on her new life, and now she was sitting in a cheap room counting how many diapers were left. That kind of reversal can choke a person. Leslie told herself she could fix it quietly. She told herself she just needed time, just needed to get her feet back under her. She still believed Joe would come around if she stayed calm. She still believed his family would soften if she stopped resisting. She still believed there was a version of this where she didn't have to crawl back to the mother she had erased. The first week, she survived on whatever she could still access. Small balances. A card that worked once and then didn't. She called customer service and got the same polite wall. "We'll have to verify." Verify with who? Verify with Joe. Verify with paperwork she didn't have. She tried to log in and got locked out. And when she called again, a calm voice told her the account was under review. Under review. That's what they call it when they're holding your life in a fist and pretending it's policy. Leslie kept calling Joe, voice getting smaller each time. The one time he finally answered, he didn't sound angry. He sounded inconvenienced. "I told you to take a break," he said. "Why are you acting like a victim?" Leslie's breath hitched. "Because you changed the locks," she said. Joe's pause was short and sharp. "My father handled security," he replied. "I didn't want drama." Drama. He called her homelessness drama. Leslie asked him to meet her somewhere public, somewhere neutral. Joe laughed once, dry. "You always want an audience when you don't get your way," he said, and then he hung up. That's when Leslie began to understand something she had been refusing to admit. This was coordinated. This wasn't a misunderstanding between spouses. This was a plan the whole family was following, and Joe was the door they had closed behind her. Still, she didn't call me. Instead, she reached out to old friends she hadn't spoken to in years. She typed careful messages, pretending she was just going through a transition. Most didn't respond. Some responded politely but distantly, like they didn't want to be pulled into a mess. One offered her a couch for 2 nights and then started hinting that their landlord had rules. Leslie thanked them and left early rather than be asked to go. She tried to sell a few things. Earrings, a watch Joe gave her, a bag she once took pictures with, but the offers she got were insulting, and she couldn't bring herself to accept how low she'd fallen. The kids began asking for familiar foods, asking when they were going home, and Leslie kept saying soon until soon stopped sounding believable even to her. She started skipping meals so the children could eat. She started watering down juice to make it last. She started counting coins at night with the bathroom door closed so her babies wouldn't see her crying. On the 10th day, she unblocked my number and stared at it like it might bite her. Her thumb hovered over the call button, trembling. Then the phone buzzed with a notification from her bank, and her face went still. It wasn't a warning about low funds. It was a simple message that said the last available balance had been withdrawn. Leslie stared at the screen, throat working, and in that moment, the last bit of control she'd been pretending to have disappeared. She set the phone down slowly because there was nothing left to move. Leslie learned to move differently when there was nothing left. Not dramatic, not frantic, just smaller, quieter, like every step had to be justified. She stopped carrying her purse the way she used to, swinging it with confidence. Now she held a cheap tote close to her side like it contained her pride, like the wrong person looking at it too long could spill the truth all over the sidewalk. The children didn't know the full shape of what was happening, but they felt it. Children always do. They felt it in the way her voice stayed soft, even when she was tired, in the way she smiled too quickly, in the way she kept counting things, minutes, miles, coins, like numbers could keep the world from collapsing. That morning, She walked them to a small bakery tucked between a laundromat and a closed beauty supply store, the kind of place that put out yesterday's pastries in a glass case, and kept the lights warm to make the sugar look generous. The sign in the window promised fresh bread, but the air inside smelled like sweet leftovers. Leslie didn't come for fresh anything. Fresh cost money. She came because she had learned which places threw food away, which managers could be softened by a quiet voice, which workers would pretend not to see you gathering crumbs of dignity off the floor. She stood at the counter with her children pressed close, their eyes tracking the cookies, the cupcakes, the bright frosting like it belonged to another world. The older one asked for something with sprinkles. Leslie didn't say no. She said, "We'll see," and the way she said it carried a tenderness that hurt more than refusal. Behind the counter, a young woman in an apron glanced at the kids and then at Leslie's clothes. Still meat, still trying, before her eyes drifted to the tote bag and the worn shoes. The woman's smile didn't disappear, but it tightened like she didn't know what kind of customer Leslie was. Leslie waited until the line cleared, then leaned in slightly, voice gentle, respectful. She didn't announce desperation. She didn't plead. She spoke the way women speak when they're trying to survive without being punished for it. "Ma'am," she said softly, "do y'all have anything you're tossing out today? Anything from yesterday? I can take it. My babies." She stopped herself before the sentence got too emotional, because emotion makes people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people get cruel. The young woman hesitated, eyes flicking toward the back, like she was checking if someone older was watching. Then she nodded once, small. "We do," she said, "but it's past date." Leslie nodded like she understood regulations, like she was simply being practical. "That's fine," she said. "I'll take whatever you can spare." The young woman disappeared into the back, and the minutes stretched while Leslie kept her children distracted by pointing out the little pastries like they were in a museum. "Look at that one," she murmured, smiling. "That one's pretty. Pretty, but not for them." When the worker came back, she carried a black trash bag tied tight, the plastic shiny with something heavy inside. She set it on the counter like she didn't want to touch it too long. "It's mostly cakes," she said, voice low. "Some have dents. Some are expired." She said, expired like it was poison. Leslie didn't flinch. She didn't ask questions that might make the worker change her mind. She just nodded and reached for the bag. That's when a man in line behind her made a sound, a low scoff, the kind of sound men make when they want to remind you you're beneath them without using words. Leslie's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn around. She kept her smile in place like a shield. The man muttered something about beggars, and the young woman behind the counter looked down, embarrassed, not at him, at Leslie, like poverty was contagious, and she didn't want it in her shop. Leslie didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She adjusted the bag in her arms, the plastic cutting into her fingers, and said, "Thank you," like gratitude was the only safe language she had left. The older child tugged at her sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, why is it in a trash bag?" Leslie swallowed, eyes forward. "Because they're being nice," she said, "and we don't waste." The child nodded slowly, absorbing lessons no child should have to learn. Leslie walked out of the bakery holding that bag like a secret, head high, steps steady. Outside, the sun was bright enough to make everything look exposed. She carried the children's hands in one of hers and balanced the bag with the other, muscles trembling from the weight. And she did not cry. Crying would have been loud. Loud would have made it real. Halfway down the sidewalk, she stopped beside a bench because the smaller child's shoes were loose, laces dragging. She crouched, set the bag down carefully, and tied the little laces with fingers that looked too delicate for this kind of life. When she stood again, she glanced at the bag, and her mouth tightened, not in disgust, in resignation. She lifted it, adjusted the tote on her shoulder, and started walking again, her children on either side of her like anchors. She didn't see the car pull up nearby, because her eyes were fixed on the pavement, fixed on getting from 1 minute to the next without breaking. She didn't see the chrome, the clean shine, the kind of vehicle that announces money before anyone steps out. She only heard the door close softly, and then a voice, familiar in a way that made her whole body freeze mid-step. "Leslie," the voice said, calm and clear, as if it had never been blocked. The sound of her name coming from my mouth didn't travel far, but it hit her like a hand on the spine. Leslie stopped mid-step, so suddenly the children bumped into her legs. Confused, their small hands still hooked around hers. The black bag of cakes sagged against her hip, plastic stretched thin, and she held it tighter out of instinct like it could protect her from being seen. She turned slowly, not because she wanted to, but because her body understood what her mind hadn't accepted yet. You can run from people, but you can't run from a voice that raised you. Her eyes found me and stayed there, wide and sharp, as if she was trying to decide whether I was real or a punishment. And then her gaze dropped, quick, involuntary, to the car behind me, because the street reflected in its chrome like a mirror, and there was no way to miss what it was. A Rolls Royce doesn't blend in. It sits on a street like it owns silence. The hood looked like clean money, the kind of clean that comes from lawyers and patience, not luck. Leslie's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her throat worked once, twice, and still nothing. Shame will do that to a person. It will choke the words right at the moment you need them most. I didn't rush toward her. I didn't throw my arms around her like we were in a movie, and the years between us didn't exist. I stood where I was beside the open door, my posture steady, my face calm, because I had learned something about dignity. It's not loud. It's how you hold yourself when you could fall apart and choose not to. Leslie stared at me like she'd never really looked at me before. She took in my hair, my coat, the quiet quality of my presence, and I watched her eyes try to reconcile two truths that didn't fit in her head at the same time: the mother she cut off and the woman standing in front of her now. Her children looked at me with that open curiosity children have, the kind that hasn't learned family history yet. The older one's eyes moved from my face to the car and back, like they were measuring safety. The smaller one clung to Leslie's hand and leaned into her hip, wary of strangers. Leslie's fingers tightened around their hands, her knuckles whitening. She finally found her voice, but it came out thin. "Mom," she whispered, like saying it hurt. The word sounded foreign on her tongue, like she hadn't practiced it in years. I nodded once. That was all. I let the moment settle the way it needed to settle, because I could see the panic rising in her, not dramatic, internal, the kind that makes a person want to run even while their feet are glued down. Her eyes flicked toward the end of the street, as if she expected Joe's family to appear out of nowhere and catch her being seen with me. That told me something. Not everything. Just enough to tighten my chest. "You okay?" I asked, but my voice stayed even, not soft, not accusing. Leslie swallowed again. "We're fine," she said too fast, and that was the lie that told the truth. The children weren't fine. The bag in her hand wasn't fine. The way her shoulders curled inward like she was bracing for a hit wasn't fine. The way she kept checking the street wasn't fine. I took a slow step closer, careful not to invade, and my eyes landed on the black bag. Its shape uneven, the plastic shiny, tied too tight at the top. I didn't ask what it was. I didn't need to. I had lived long enough to recognize survival packaged in humiliation. Leslie followed my gaze and flinched like she'd been caught stealing. She shifted the bag behind her leg, as if hiding it could undo what it meant. I didn't let my face change. I didn't let pity leak out. Pity would have humiliated her more than hunger ever could. I looked at her hands instead, fingers raw from gripping, nails clean but bitten down, the kind of hands that had been stressed quietly for a long time. "Get in the car," I said. Not like a command. Like a mother who knows there's no dignity in standing on a sidewalk bleeding. Leslie didn't move. Her eyes filled, but she blinked hard, forcing it back because she didn't want her children to see. I can't, she said. I can't. She stopped, throat tightening again. She glanced at the car one more time, and I saw the thought behind her eyes. I don't belong in that. Not after what I did. She looked at me like she expected me to punish her, to lecture her right there in front of her babies, to make her confess publicly. I didn't. I moved around to the other side and opened the back door for the children, making space without making a show of it. The older one stepped in slowly, watching me with cautious respect. The younger one hesitated until Leslie squeezed their hand and murmured, "It's okay." The word okay sounded like she was trying to convince herself. Leslie stayed on the sidewalk, frozen between pride and need, and I could see that pride had been the only thing keeping her upright for a long time. I lowered my voice, just for her. "Leslie," I said steady, "look at me." She did, and the moment her eyes met mine, the years between us flickered. Her, as a little girl, with scraped knees, me wiping blood, and telling her she'd be all right. I didn't reach for that memory. I stayed in the present. "What happened?" I asked. No extra words. No judgment. Just the question that mattered. Leslie's lips trembled. Her eyes darted to her children, then back to me, and the answer came out like a broken confession she couldn't hold in anymore. "My in-laws," she whispered. "They took everything." Leslie's words sat in the car, like smoke. The children were strapped in the back seat, quiet now, watching the world slide past the windows, as if they'd learned not to ask for things they couldn't control. Leslie sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded tight in her lap, knuckles pale, eyes fixed forward like if she looked at me too long she might fall apart. I drove without rushing. Rushing would have made it feel like panic. Panic would have made her feel unsafe. The Rolls moved through traffic smooth and silent, and the silence inside, it was louder than any engine. "Tell me the shape of it," I said, finally, voice calm, not soft. Softness would have invited her to collapse. Not the feelings, the facts. Leslie swallowed and started with the smallest details first, like she was afraid the truth would punish her for saying it out loud. "They said it was temporary," she murmured. "They said it was for protection." Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, checking her children, then back to the windshield. "They had me signing things. I thought it was normal." Her voice tightened. "They said if I didn't sign, I didn't trust my husband." I kept my eyes on the road, but my jaw set. "Who put the papers in front of you?" I asked. "Joe," she said. "His mother." There was a man who kept pointing where to sign. "Did you take copies?" I asked. Leslie shook her head, once, ashamed. "They wouldn't let me," she whispered. "They said I was overthinking." The word made me breathe out through my nose, slow. I'd heard it used like a leash before. "When did you lose access?" I asked. "First it was one account," she said, "then more. Then mail stopped coming to me. Then the locks." Her voice broke on that last part, but she swallowed it back. "And when I pushed, they started talking about the kids. About stability. About how I was emotional. Emotional. The easiest word in the world to weaponize against a woman. I nodded once. "They didn't just take money," I said quietly. "They took your credibility." Leslie's eyes finally turned toward me, wide. "Mom," she whispered, "I don't even have a lawyer." "You do now," I said, and pulled into the parking lot of a small building I owned under a plain name. Not flashy, just solid. Inside, there was a private suite that didn't look like money trying to impress. It looked like money protecting itself. Clean lines, simple furniture, quiet. I led Leslie and the children in, gave the kids a small room with snacks, and a cartoon playing low, so they wouldn't hear grown people talk about fear. Leslie sat on the couch, like she didn't know how to relax anymore, shoulders still braced. I didn't ask if she was hungry. Hunger is obvious. I asked what mattered. Do you still have your ID? I said. She nodded, reaching into her tote and pulling out a worn wallet with trembling fingers. Phone. I asked. She held it up like it was both weapon and wound. I took a seat across from her, not beside her. Beside would have been comfort. This wasn't comfort time. This was triage. Listen to me, I said, slow, letting my voice become a railing she could hold. This is not about who loves who. This is about what they made you sign and how they used it. Leslie nodded fast, desperate. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know. I believe you didn't understand. I corrected gently, but you knew something felt off. Next time, you listen to that. Her face tightened like the words slapped, but she didn't argue because part of her knew it was true. I stood, walked to my desk, and picked up my phone. Leslie's eyes followed it like it was a gun. Who are you calling? She asked, voice small. I looked back at her. Someone who doesn't get emotional about paperwork. I said. Someone who knows how to stop people mid-step. I dialed a number I hadn't used in months, not because I didn't have it, but because I didn't need it. The call connected on the second ring. A man's voice answered, steady, unhurried. This is the office, he said. Janice West, I replied. There was a brief pause, then a shift in tone. Respect, recognition, readiness. Mrs. West, he said. I was wondering when you'd call. I didn't waste time explaining who I was. That's not how power speaks. I need an emergency filing, I said. Today. Leslie leaned forward, breath caught. What's the issue? The man asked. Coercion and misrepresentation tied to a parcel in my name, I said. Voice even. My daughter has been pushed into signing documents she didn't fully understand. Access to accounts has been restricted, and there are indicators of a coordinated effort to move against the property through her. I heard him inhale quietly, like his brain had already started arranging the steps. Do you have documents? He asked. Not yet, I said, but I have enough to freeze movement while we pull the trail. You want an injunction? He asked. I want a title freeze. I said, I want immediate notice sent to any parties attempting to record or transact against that parcel, and I want bank notifications drafted for any related funds once we identify them. I spoke in plain language, but each sentence carried weight. Leslie stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time, not as a poor woman with tired hands, but as someone who knew doors inside systems. Understood, he said. I'll file emergency relief and start a forensic pull on related filings. Good, I replied. And I want a formal letter sent to Joe's family council by end of day. Let them know this stops now. I ended the call without ceremony. Leslie's lips parted. Mom, she breathed. What did you just do? I looked at her, calm. I put my foot on the brake. I said. My phone buzzed almost immediately with a confirmation message, short and cold, like a judge's gavel made digital. I glanced at the screen once, then met Leslie's eyes. Whatever they were trying to move, I told her, voice steady, just hit a wall. Panic in a polished family doesn't sound like screaming. It sounds like doors closing softly in the wrong order, voices lowering too fast, and people who usually take their time suddenly moving like time is chasing them. Leslie felt it before she saw it. The moment my call landed where it needed to land, her shoulders dropped half an inch like her body finally believed she wasn't alone on that sidewalk anymore. We sat in that quiet suite while her children watched cartoons in the next room, the volume low enough that I could still hear Leslie's breathing. She wasn't crying. She was listening, like a woman who has spent too long being punished for speaking. Her phone lit up on the cushion beside her, vibrating like a trapped insect. She flinched at the first ring, then stared at the screen until it went silent. The second call came immediately, then the third. Same name. Joe. She swallowed, eyes darting to me, and I didn't nod or shake my head. I just watched her choose. She answered on the fourth ring, voice careful. Hello. Joe didn't greet her. Where are you? He snapped. Leslie blinked, like she wasn't used to being spoken to like that without an audience. I'm safe, she said quietly. Joe gave a short laugh that didn't have humor in it. Safe, he repeated. Do you have any idea what you just did? Leslie's hand tightened around the phone. I didn't do anything, she said, still trying to keep peace the way women keep peace right up until it kills them. Joe's breath sounded fast, like he was pacing. Something got filed. He hissed. People are calling. Our counsel is calling. Everything is on hold. The words came out sharp, clipped, like he was spitting out broken glass. Leslie's eyes widened. Hold. That word didn't belong in a marriage argument. It belonged in business. In timelines. In plans. Joe's tone shifted suddenly. Too smooth, too practiced. Listen, he said, softer now? You're stressed. You've been unstable. Let's not make this worse. Unstable. There it was. The same label he used like a muzzle. Leslie's lips parted, and for a second I thought she would accept it like she had before, apologize for being human. Instead her voice tightened. Stop calling me that, she said, not loud, not dramatic, just sharp enough to cut through him. Joe went quiet for one beat, surprised. Then his voice dropped low, almost gentle, which is how men sound when they're about to threaten you without sounding like a villain. You want to be careful, he murmured, because there are 2 children involved. Leslie went still. I watched the blood drain from her face. That was the moment her shame tried to rise again, because shame is easier than fear. But fear was real now. She didn't speak. She held the phone like it was burning her hand. I reached out and opened my palm, slow, giving her a choice without forcing it. Leslie stared at my hand, swallowed, then placed the phone into it like she was placing down something heavy she'd been carrying alone. I brought it to my ear. This is Janice West, I said calmly. On the other end, Joe's breathing stopped for half a second. That pause told me everything. His voice came back careful, polite in a way it hadn't been with Leslie. Mrs. West, he said, trying to sound respectful, trying to rebuild the distance he'd lost. I didn't offer warmth. Your mention of the children, I said evenly, is noted. Say it again, and you'll regret the record it creates. Joe scoffed, weak. I'm not threatening. Yes, you are. I cut in, still calm. And you're doing it because you think your family's name scares women into silence. Behind his voice, I heard movement, another person entering the room, whispering to him, urgent. Joe's tone shifted again, strained. We can resolve this, he said quickly. There's no need for escalation. This is a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. That's what people call a scheme when it stops working. Leslie's phone on the couch kept buzzing. New numbers now. Unfamiliar. One message popped up on the screen, and even from a distance I could read the shape of it. Short, commanding, angry. Leslie didn't touch it. She just stared like she was watching her old life show its true face. A second message came right after. This one was different. Not angry, nervous. Tell your mother to stand down. It read, you're ruining the timeline. Timeline. I held my gaze on that word, felt the cold satisfaction of truth. Projects have timelines. Deals have timelines. Investors have timelines. Families don't. I put Joe back on speaker without warning, not to humiliate him, but to let Leslie hear what was real. Your timeline, I said into the phone, is not my problem. Your mistake was thinking you could move around me without consequence. The line went quiet, then a new voice came on, older, smoother, carefully respectful in a way that sounded like fear wearing good manners. "Mrs. West," the voice said, "we can have a private conversation. There's been confusion." I looked at Leslie, and in her eyes I saw it land. This wasn't her being emotional. This was them being exposed. "No," I said, voice steady as stone. "There's been an underestimation." The day after that call, Leslie slept like a person who hadn't been allowed to sleep in years. Not deep, peaceful sleep, survival sleep. The kind where your body shuts down because it can't keep standing guard. I watched her in the morning from the doorway of the guest room. The children curled close to her like they were still afraid the world could snatch her away if they loosened their grip. Her face looked softer in rest, but the tension hadn't left her completely. It stayed in her hands. Even while she slept, fingers still curled like she was holding on to something invisible. I didn't wake her with love talk. I woke her with structure, because structure is what pulls a person out of chaos without lying to them. When she finally came into the kitchen, hair wrapped, eyes swollen, she froze when she saw the folder on the table. Thick, organized, tabs. Leslie's throat worked. "What is that?" she asked, voice small. I poured her tea and slid it toward her before answering. "That," I said, tapping the folder once, "is your life coming back in pieces." She sat slowly, cautious, like she didn't trust hope. I opened the folder and pushed the first page toward her. It wasn't dramatic. It was plain. A temporary safety arrangement outlining where she and the children would stay, how expenses would be handled, and what she was allowed to do without asking anyone's permission. Leslie read it twice, blinking hard. You wrote this?" she asked. "No," I replied. "I had it drafted." That's the difference between being emotional and being prepared. The word stung, and I saw it in her eyes, but she didn't look away. She needed the truth, not comfort. I slid the next set toward her, steps to restore her identity inside the systems Joe's family used against her. New access, new passwords, a clean mailing address under her control. Not revenge. Control. Leslie's fingers trembled as she traced the lines like she was touching something sacred. "They told me I couldn't do any of this without Joe," she whispered. I kept my voice steady. "They told you that because you believe them," I said. "You don't have to keep believing people who profit from your fear." Leslie swallowed. She nodded once, slow, accepting the shame without drowning in it. Then I placed the next page down, and this one made her flinch. Terms, not legal jargon, plain language, clear as daylight. "Mom," she said, eyes lifting to mine, "what is this?" I didn't soften my tone. "This is what I require if I'm going to help you rebuild," I said. Leslie's mouth tightened. She braced like she expected punishment. I didn't give her punishment. I gave her boundaries. "One," I said, sliding my finger down the page. "You do not return to that house. Not for clothes. Not for closure. Not for apologies. If you need anything, we request it through the proper channel." Leslie's shoulders sagged, grief and relief mixing. "Two," I continued, "you do not speak to them alone. Not Joe. Not his mother. Nobody. Every call, every message, every visit goes through the process. You are not going to be cornered again." Leslie nodded quickly, like she'd been waiting for someone to say that. "Three," I said, tapping the page. "Your business, whatever you built, whatever they dismantled, we rebuild it, but not the way you did before. You do not sign anything without review. You do not agree to anything because someone calls you ungrateful. You don't buy safety by surrendering your rights." Her eyes filled, but she blinked it back. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought being a good wife meant. Being a good wife doesn't mean disappearing." I cut in, calm but firm. Then I slid the final page toward her, and this was the one that carried the real weight. The assets. The land. My land stayed under my control. Any protection I built around her would be built with my authority, not hers, not because I wanted to own her, but because I knew what her name had become to predators. Leslie stared at the page. So long her tea went untouched. "So, I don't get access," she said quietly, not accusing, just processing. I met her eyes. "Not yet," I said, "because you don't have instincts right now. You have guilt. And guilt makes people easy to manipulate." Leslie's jaw trembled. "You don't trust me?" she whispered. The sentence was small, but it carried years. I leaned forward slightly, letting my voice drop into something that would reach her where pride couldn't block it. "I trust your heart," I said. "I don't trust what you've been trained to tolerate." Leslie's face crumpled for a second, and she pressed her lips together to keep herself from crying loud. The children's laughter floated in from the other room, innocent and unaware, and Leslie looked toward it like it was the only pure thing left in her world. I placed my hand on the table, palm down, steady. "I'm not saving you," I said, slow, letting each word land clean. "I'm teaching you." Leslie stared at me, breathing uneven. I watched the fight inside her, between wanting comfort and needing change, between wanting her old life back, and understanding that old life was built on her silence. She picked up the pen sitting beside the folder, held it for a moment like it was heavier than it should be, then looked at me with a quiet defeat that wasn't weakness. It was surrender to reality. "Tell me what to do," she whispered. Then she signed. The first week after Leslie signed those terms, she kept expecting the ground to disappear again. I could see it in the way she moved through my house, like she was borrowing air. She would wash dishes twice, wipe counters that were already clean, fold the children's clothes with a focus that looked like prayer. She wasn't trying to impress me. She was trying to prove to herself that she deserved to stay somewhere safe. At night, when the children finally slept, Leslie would sit on the edge of the guest bed with her phone in her hand, staring at the screen like it might light up with another threat. Sometimes it did. Unknown numbers, messages that tried to sound reasonable and failed. Sometimes it was just silence, and silence was worse because silence is where fear grows teeth. I didn't tell her it would be fine. I told her what would be true. "They'll try again," I said one morning while the kettle hissed. "Not because they're brave, because they're used to people bending." Leslie nodded without looking up, her eyes fixed on her tea as if she was afraid my face might show disappointment if she met it too long. That's the thing about reconciliation after betrayal. It doesn't come with hugging and crying and skipping straight to love. It comes with awkward breakfasts. It comes with careful sentences. It comes with a daughter who doesn't know if her mother is still safe to lean on, and a mother who doesn't know if leaning will break her spine again. The safety came first. We got the children into a routine, school drop-offs, meals that didn't involve counting coins, bedtime stories that didn't end in whispered panic. I watched them start to loosen. The older ones stopped flinching at sudden sounds. The younger ones started laughing with their whole body again, not the quiet, cautious giggle they'd had in that extended stay room. Safety changes children fast, the way sunlight changes plants. Leslie changed slower. She had learned too well how to shrink. She would apologize for things that didn't require apology, taking an extra towel, using too much soap, needing a ride. One evening, she dropped a glass in the kitchen and froze like she expected someone to punish her. The sound shattered across the floor, and the children looked up, startled. Leslie's face tightened. "I'm sorry," she blurted, reaching for the pieces too quickly. I'm sorry. I caught her wrist gently, not hard, just enough to stop the panic from driving her. "Leslie," I said steady, "it's a glass." She stood there breathing too fast, eyes shiny, shoulders raised like armor. That's when I knew how deep Joe's family had dug into her nervous system. They didn't just take money. They trained her body to fear her own mistakes. The legal process moved the way it always moves, slow for the innocent, quick for the arrogant. Once they realize a woman knows the rules, the people who had been so confident behind doors suddenly became careful. They stopped texting Leslie directly. Their attorneys started calling through official channels with softer voices and longer pauses. The project they had been trying to protect began to wobble because projects don't survive scrutiny. When you freeze movement, you freeze lies. And once movement froze, other people started asking questions. People Joe's family couldn't bully with family language. Investors don't care about respectability when they smell risk. They care about paper trails. They care about exposure. They care about getting out before the story becomes public enough to stain them. The custody threats disappeared first, not because their hearts softened, but because threats don't work when the woman they're aimed at isn't alone anymore. Leslie received one final message from Joe, cold and bitter, saying she was turning into her mother. She stared at it for a long time, then handed me the phone without speaking. I read it once, then set it down. He meant that as an insult, I said. Leslie's voice shook. Maybe it's true, she whispered. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since I saw her on that sidewalk, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't only shame. It was anger, quiet, controlled, useful. Good, I said, because your mother is the reason your children still have a future. Leslie didn't ask for forgiveness right away. Not the way people do when they want comfort more than truth. She tried once on a quiet afternoon while the children played in the backyard. She stood beside me on the porch, hands clasped, staring out at the yard like she couldn't bear to look directly at what she'd done. I was wrong, she said, voice thin. I treated you like, she swallowed, like you were something I needed to outgrow. I didn't answer with a speech. I didn't give her easy absolution. I let the silence sit long enough for her to feel the weight of it, because weight is what teaches people not to repeat a sin. Then I nodded once. You were wrong. I agreed. Leslie flinched, tears rising, and I held my tone steady. And you'll spend the rest of your life proving you learned. She wiped her face quickly, ashamed of needing to cry. And I didn't shame her for it. I just didn't rescue her from it. Our relationship reopened the way a door opens after a storm, slow, stiff at the hinges, careful about wind. Some days were quiet and normal. Some days, Leslie would go silent mid-sentence, like she'd heard Joe's voice in her head. Some nights she would wake up, sweating, convinced someone was coming to take the children. Each time, I reminded her of the truth with actions, not speeches. Locks that were hers, accounts that were hers, a routine that didn't depend on anybody's permission. And the land stayed where it always had been, steady, unmoved by shame, held by a woman who refused to be rushed out of what was hers. I stood on my porch one evening watching the sun drop low, listening to my grandchildren laugh, and I felt something settle in my chest that wasn't victory exactly. It was peace with a spine. Poverty didn't make me weak. It taught me how to wait and how to win.